Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I have 12:01, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone to being here. As always, these will be recorded. I will post them hopefully early next week on our YouTube channel. The Wednesday webinars, you guys are all familiar with what they are. We're going to put one on every month. I am open to suggestions, and I may be putting out a survey in the future to try to get some topic ideas. But if you guys ever have any ideas for a topic or a speaker, please let me know, and I will see what I can do to get those scheduled. Today's topic, we're going to talk about geographic information systems and using them to enhance and inform public messaging. So providing easy to read maps of impacted areas can help the public understand the immediate ramifications to themselves and their loved ones during any kind of emergency event. Today, we will discuss ways in which GIS can help to enhance and inform public messaging. You will learn the ins and outs of engaging effectively with your agency's GIS staff, the basics of maps designed specifically for social media messaging, as well as how to create some quick and simple maps that can be used by PIOs in their engagement with the media. Today's speaker is Carmella Burdi. She is a senior GIS analyst with the National Preparedness Analytics Group. She works for Argonne National Laboratory. Carmella has an MS in GIS from Northwest Missouri State University and a BA in Geography and Environmental Planning from Elmhurst University. Prior to her work at Argonne, Carmella spent 8 years at DuPage County supporting the Office of Emergency Management and the Sheriff's Office. And Carmella is also an adjunct instructor at Elmhurst University. So if everybody would help me welcome Carmella. Carmella, the floor is yours. I have made you co-host. You may share the screen whenever. And thank you so much for being here today. Looking forward to it.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, David, for that welcome. My name is Carmella Burdi, and I do work in the National Preparedness Analytics Center here at Argonne National Laboratory. That's where I'm sitting right now. I'm just going to go over kind of what I want to cover today. So I thought I would just put a little agenda together. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about, what is GIS, who does GIS, why does that matter? I'm going to talk a little bit about public messaging and some of the considerations that we have to keep in mind when we're crafting our messages. And then I'm going to talk about how we can bring all of these things together. So just a little bit about me before we get started. I come to emergency management by way of GIS. So as David said, I spent about 8 years in local government, county government, supporting our Office of Emergency Management and our Sheriff's Office. And so that gave me my taste, right, of the importance of how maps can help in emergency operations centers during activations. Yeah, I'm in Illinois, so DuPage County is about 1 million people in Illinois, and it's the Midwest, so mostly flooding and like cold weather events, blizzards, things like that. So it was a really good learning opportunity, and it was a really great way for me to see exactly what the folks in the field are dealing with during an emergency and what they need out of their support staff. And so GIS is sort of, I think, in that support staff space, and sometimes learning how to engage with your support staff can be just as important as learning how to engage with your branch chief or your floor chief or whoever it is. So I'm going to do questions at the end because I can't do the chat and the screen sharing at the same time. But if you do want to put questions in the chat, I can get to them at the end, and then we'll spend a couple of minutes doing questions when we sort of wrap up here. So what is a GIS? So GIS is, or a Geographic Information System, is really a computer system that analyzes and displays geographically referenced information. So it's using data that is attached to a unique location on the Earth's surface. Most of the information that we have about our world contains some sort of reference to its location. So where are stream gauges located? Where was a rock sample collected? Where are all the fire hydrants in my city? There's like a joke in the GIS community that 80% of all data is spatial data. And I say it's a joke because no one knows where that number came from, but it sounds about right. So we'll take it, right? 80% of all data out there anywhere has some sort of spatial location to it. And so GIS, the GIS, sometimes I'll refer to it as a GIS or the GIS. This computer system is going to connect that data to a map. And so it's going to integrate location data where things are with descriptive information about it, what those things are like. So we often call that attribution. So we're taking spatial data, a point on a map, and we're providing attributes about it. So this is the location of my police station. There are this many officers on duty, this many cars or whatever are able to be dispatched, that type of thing. So it's the attribute information that's not necessarily spatially referenced, along with its point location on the Earth's surface, that really makes it valuable. And this is our foundation. This is our foundation for all mapping and all analysis that's used in almost any industry, right? Including emergency management. And we'll talk about that. This slide, I like this slide because it kind of shows the depth and breadth of the GIS layers that we might have. So just kind of looking at that, we're going to see that we might have water bodies, we might have parcel boundaries or district boundaries, we might have transportation, street routes, things like that, building data, topographic data, flood data, those types of things. So it really spans a pretty wide variety, and it allows us to create visuals that'll help us look for patterns. And so I think that when we talk about a GIS and we talk about everything that it's capable of, because it's not just maps, right? It's not just printing out a map and handing it to someone. It's collating data, it's collecting data, it's analyzing data, it's looking for patterns. And then in some instances, it's creating web applications or phone applications that folks can use to help them in the field or out and about doing their duties. And so when we think about all of that, I really want to stress that one of the things that a GIS does really, really well is it helps us improve communication. It helps us improve the efficiency of our communications and get that information to decision makers faster, and in a way that they can look at it, ingest it, understand it, and make a decision. So we can use a GIS to help us identify problems, to monitor changing scenarios or monitoring change on the face of our Earth surface, like wherever where our region or location is. We can use the GIS to help us manage and respond to events, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We can perform forecasting, we can set priorities, and we can understand trends and identify patterns. That doesn't sound like a lot when you kind of list it out, but when you really start to break it out into how powerful this can be, it really is a lot. And so I'm going to stress the importance of this a few times today, and probably maybe too many times, but I think it's just because while there are a lot of folks that do understand what a GIS is, I don't think everyone has a really deep knowledge of exactly what it's capable of in the hands of a GIS professional. So we can take, in my last slide kind of had that stack of layers, right? We can take many different kinds of that data and stack it and start to include things like imagery, aerial imagery, point features, or road base maps, and we can link all of that to our spreadsheets and our tables and our attribute data. And then I'll talk a little bit about analysis, but really this is going to let us do a lot of what we need to do, as sort of emergency managers, right? It lets us look at suitability of locations. So if I'm trying to figure out where to stage my pods, my points of dispensary, or where to stage shelters or things like that, I can use the GIS to help me evaluate that. How many people have access to this particular facility that I'm thinking about looking at for a shelter? can they walk there? Do they have transportation? Is there public transportation? All of that can kind of go in and be found in the map to help you make those decisions. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I do think it's interesting. This is sort of like a who does GIS, and this is just to kind of, again, impress upon you guys the layers of folks that do this type of analysis from like everyone, right? The general public, to sort of the top level here of like the real like geoscientists, like the environmentalists, like the folks that are doing like the NASA stuff, right? So I'm somewhere in between. I'm not that top one, but I'm somewhere maybe in the middle here. But there's a lot of different folks that use this for a lot of different reasons. We have amateurs and dabblers. We have super science people. But you'll see, right, like this middle chunk is a lot. This is probably 90% of people, right? We're talking about police and fire. We're talking about businesses that are using GIS for retail site selection or things like that. We're talking about the guy at the county that's making the tax maps. That was me for a long time, right? So there's a lot of different levels to this. And then again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide either, but this is just to kind of give you that sense of exactly where we're using GIS and how it's being integrated into almost every discipline. I would say historically, right, environmentalists have been like sort of the heaviest users using GIS to study groundwater or impact assessments or climate change or that type of thing. And then, you know, agriculture, farming, land use, all of that to map out crops and soil types and do precision farming or other forestry things, right? Like that's sort of historically been a lot of the focus. But on the business side of things, we're using GIS for consumer profiling, for supply chain management. I actually do a lot of supply chain management using GIS. We use it for real estate and land planning. And again, we can do those types of comparative analysis or location-based analysis to help us do our planning better, help us do our staging better. And then also to help us respond when an incident does occur, right? I can look at my maps and I can figure out where I need to go faster or first. We often use GIS in the media to communicate stories. We target election seasons coming up. How many maps you're going to see coming up to you know, the election. We're going to just be bombarded with all sorts of different maps. But lots of news outlets use maps or map stories to communicate. The New York Times is one. They often have a lot of like interactive mapping components that go on in conjunction with their articles and stories. And then the last thing I'll sort of mention here is just that, you know, the note that like the military and the defense are heavy GIS users, right? They care about location intelligence, logistics management, satellites, things like that. And then we do have, you know, our public safety folks, which we'll talk way more about, but using GIS to help us, you know, do disaster response, to get out public health information. GIS was really, really important during the early stages of the COVID pandemic. If anyone remembers the Johns Hopkins dashboard that everyone was sharing on Facebook, you know, that was a good example of how we can use GIS to give data to people in order to, you know, to help with our messaging needs. All right. I just want to talk a little bit about sort of the integration here, and then we're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but of public safety, or sort of the intersection, I should say, of public safety and GIS. A lot of public safety agencies and organizations use GIS to, again, understand where they can focus their efforts in to do prevention, to mitigate against, to protect against different hazards and threats. And so with a GIS, one thing that we can do that I haven't talked much about yet is we can do real-time data-driven insights. And so there's a lot of data that is being pulled constantly and being refreshed constantly. Think about like Waze or your Google Maps giving you real-time traffic information, National Weather Service giving you, real-time sort of satellite weather data. All of that can be brought into your GIS for display. And that can help us to do, mission critical decision making, right? It can help us respond and recover from our, threats to our community. When we do integrate that real-time sensor data, right, like that really helps us gain that understanding that we need to capture sort of the broader picture of what's going on in the moment. So you guys all know, right, where an emergency happens, there's a flood or there's, severe weather or something, and it's kind of like, okay, we're triaging, we're trying to understand the bigger picture. The GIS helps us get that bigger picture because it's all in one spot, right? We can visualize all of the road closures. We can visualize where all of our trucks are being deployed to salt or plow or whatever it is. Again, we can use this for planning. We can do data sharing, data collaboration. We can share things with partner organizations so that we're reducing sort of redundancy. We can engage the public on initiatives. So that's another thing that we'll talk about is, soliciting information from the public using maps. We can do that through some survey tools that lets them come in and say, hey, I live here and there's a tree down on my street or whatever it is. And so that can then help inform efforts to communicate, to folks, don't go this way. We have confirmed, they took a picture, we have confirmed tree down, like this road is closed, that type of thing. And then, again, the GIS can help us act, right? It can help us monitor those near real-time ongoing situations, make adjustments, provide situational awareness, that type of thing. And so I think what is really important to understand is that this is just a tool, right? This is just a tool in our arsenal for public safety, for doing our messaging, for adding to our response and recovery efforts as we go through the emergency management cycle. But I think it's a really powerful tool that helps us share information. It helps us engage with one another, with our partner stakeholders, or with our community, and it helps us really to uncover things that are information driven. Like this is all stuff that is real data that we're pulling together, right? It's not anecdotal. It's not maybe, sort of, kind of. This is all real, solid information. All right, switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit less about GIS and a little bit more about public messaging. I think, we sort of know what the objectives, right, of public messaging are, but, there are a lot of studies that show that during an incident, information is just as important to people as food, water, supplies, etc. So not only can information mean the difference between life and death, it can provide reassurance that response and recovery are really happening and they're on their way. And so this serves a lot of different functions, right? We can save lives and reduce injury if we know the proper protective actions to take, right? We can get that message out to folks and it enables people to reduce their risk. We can protect property. We can understand how to mitigate risk to property and the environment. We can hopefully lessen the damage inflicted by disasters. If we're doing our public messaging right, we can help calm fears and manage expectations. People who know what to expect are much more likely to follow instructions. That's proven, right? And they are much more likely to allow responders to do their jobs. I think we've seen that, like, this is more anecdotal, but like we've seen if folks know that the inspector's coming or that the first responders are coming, they're much more excited to see them, right, than they are if just someone shows up and they don't know what their objective is, right? So we want to make sure that we're helping people calm them down and managing their expectations. But also, right, we want to instill public confidence. I think there is a lot of news, a lot of information that gets sent out to people via lots of different channels. Some of it is more true than others. And so we want to make sure that we are the ones providing the timely, accurate, digestible information to our communities, right? To build confidence in ourselves as emergency managers, right? We want them to be able to see that we know what we're doing, we have their best interests at heart, and we're giving them information that they need when they need it. And that's the key, right? So there are a lot of things we have to take into account when we're talking about public messaging for emergencies, when we need to think about different considerations and challenges. There are some barriers, right? It's more difficult for people to hear messages during an emergency. There are phones are ringing, phones are not working, internet's working, internet's not working. There's stress. There are changes to routine. People are trying to get all of their stuff together, right? Like there are a lot of barriers to getting people to actually not just see the message, but hear the message, right? And like understand what it means. We have to consider timeliness. And one of the real nice things that we can do with the GIS is we can provide interactive mapping tools that are updated instantly, right? So we won't have static images that are going to expire or, be sort of, not true anymore in an hour or 2 hours, right? We're going to be able to provide data that's updating quickly. And so timeliness is a big one here. What we don't want is we don't want rumor and speculation to root, right? Like we want to make sure that there's no information vacuum. We're disseminating good, correct information and we're updating it as necessary. We have to consider the types of response, right? Like what are the protective actions we're issuing? Is it shelter in place? Is it evacuate? Is it stand by? Don't boil, don't drink your water, make sure there's oil, that type of thing. There are all sorts of different warnings and they all elicit a specific response that we want the public to do. And so we need to consider those as we're also creating our messaging, crafting any graphics or maps that go along with them. And we know that there are a lot of factors that impact how people or whether they'll actually respond to a warning, right? So there's a lot of individual characteristics like age, education, language, functional needs, that type of thing that will determine whether a specific person or family group will actually heed the protective action that's being given, or even in some cases actively go against the protective action that's being given. So we need to take all of that stuff into account. We need to take into account perception. And again, I mentioned timeliness earlier, and I'm going to talk about that a lot, but we do know that when there's been a previous experience with a hazard, a protective action has been given, and then that doesn't materialize. So like, for example, hurricanes or things like that, we know that people will say, I've been through this before, it's going to be fine. I'm not, last time they said it was going to be bad and I didn't even lose a shingle, whatever it is. So the better we can be in our messaging and the more, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, accurate, the more timely we can be here, that's gonna win us a lot of brownie points during the next disaster, right? They're gonna trust us more because we got it right the first time. There's a lot, I don't want to like dwell on this too much, right? But like there's a lot that goes into that comprehension and that receiving part of what someone does when a public message is issued or a protective action is issued. And so we can look at things like the type of community as well. We can look at family composition or community interaction. We can look at whether children are involved or pets are involved. We can look at all of that stuff to help us kind of craft our message as we move forward. And so not going to go too much into it right now, but there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of studies out there that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, right? And so let's talk about, right, the medium and the message, right? And how we're going to maybe craft a graphic or an image to meet our needs. And so we need to think about the audience. We need to think about the urgency of the message. We need to think about the reliability of whatever media we're using, whether that's newspaper, which is less likely now, radio, social media, which is most of it, that type of things, sometimes local news, television, things like that. How reliable is the available media, and how do people feel about that media? Which one is appropriate, and which one might best communicate our message. There are some things that we know that are not well communicated through an interview with a local reporter, right? Or something like that. There are some things that we know people will tune out if it's too long of a video, if it's not interesting enough, if it's, they don't think it corresponds to them because they're in someone else's neighborhood when they're doing the interview, right? Like they'll just tune out. And so we need to think about how we're sending that message. And if it's through certain social media posts, how we can get them to the people that need to get them. Geographic area is really important here. What we don't want to do is overshoot, but we also don't want to undershoot. So when we talk about public messaging and we talk about trying to get that message out there, the maps themselves can really help us hit that need to target our geographic area. We can use boundaries, you can use roadways to kind of give people an idea of where exactly the disaster is occurring, or where they need to avoid, or where they need to evacuate from. We can give them clear locations on the address or the location of a shelter or a point of dispensary, right? We can do all of that really, really clearly with a map. And we can do all of that even more clearly with an interactive map that's going to link to like their GPS or their Google Maps or whatever it is, so that they can go, boom, it's in the, I'm gone, right? And we want to be able to do that, again, to our specific geographic area. All right, I'm gonna skip on to this next one here. So this is just sort of some bullets, right, on effective communications and things that we want to keep in mind. I think you guys probably already know all of this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we want to make sure that we are considering certain style elements that are going to be easy for folks to digest, right? We don't want to use overly formal language or jargony language. We need to keep things simple for, I think FEMA always says an 8th grade reading level is what you want to shoot for when you're sort of crafting some of these messages or graphics or handouts or things like that. And that's for a number of reasons, but one is if you don't speak English particularly well, right? Like we want to be able to target out folks that can digest this message. We don't want to bog them down with unnecessary details. And so again, a graphic is nice for that because it really is going to show us the where, the what, and hopefully the time of incident, right? And like, follow along, get out, do the thing you need to do. All right. So I'm going to focus on mainly 2 types of methods, right? For print media and for internet and social media. And then we'll talk about some mapping things. But again, just to overview our goals, we want to make sure we're reaching our target audience. We want to make sure that they're getting the information they need, that they trust in the message and they trust in the reliability of the message, and that they can comprehend. So I talk a lot about digest, right? Like look and digest. People learn and intake information in different ways. Some folks are very visual learners and they want that map or their graphic. Some folks need to see it spelled out in paragraphs. My husband, it's not in a podcast, he's not listening to, like, he's not going for it, right? So we really need to like think about all of the different ways that people digest information and comprehend information and try to target all of those folks while we're crafting our messaging. So I think we can do that with some of the mapping tools that are available to us. So for this map on the screen here, this is a map from was it South Carolina, I think, and this is their evacuation zones and routes. And I like this map for a number of reasons. I like this map because it's very clear. The colors, while a little bit primary and a little bit shocking, are very, very clear, right? There's the purple, the yellow, the red. They're not, there's no overlap. We're not talking shades of gray here. And we are using the roads to delineate where our evacuation zones are. So if I'm from this area, I'm familiar with this area, I'm going to have a really good sense of where those major roads are and which evacuation zone I'm probably in just by, you know, a quick glance. That said, there are some things that are missing from this map that, you know, are not great, right? We don't have, this is really just sort of an overview map of evacuation zones. This is not saying like evacuation zone A is evacuated as of X time, or like we're recommending evacuation for evacuation zone A. This is really just sort of an overview. But I put it up here because I do think that it's an example of a map that is clearly done for folks to kind of see what zone they fall into, especially if we're messaging up ahead of an event, right? And ahead of a hurricane, we know that there, you know, there's some forecast. We think it's going to hit around here. We want to remind people of which zone they're in should the governor or the mayor or whatever issue an order, right? This is a nice map for that sort of perspective and response. When we talk about print media, and I say print media, but it's really the internet too, right? Like it's not just newspapers and magazines and things like that, because the internet has kind of subsumed that. We're talking about wanting to make sure that we are presenting, how do I want to say it, like presenting information about developing situations, right? We're educating the public about what they can expect and what's happening. And we're trying to do that in a way that is going to attract people to come look, right? Like not to scroll away and to stay on the page. And so those are the things we have to think about when we're talking about like print media, internet media type of things. We don't want them to flip by, right? And so there are a lot of advantages to this because we can cram a lot more information right into some of our internet and social media things. We can do a lot of different approaches, but there are limitations to it too, right? And some of those are things like once it's on the internet, it's on the internet forever, right? And so it's you know, maybe not going away. And we want to make sure that when we're thinking about stuff that we are probably going to post on Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever, you know, we want to make sure that if that image or graphic gets separated from the tweet or the post that it came from, people can still figure out information about it, because that's one thing that we find happens quite often. I make a map and this map is showing road closures in my county for this particular flooding event, right? If I don't put the title on the map, the date on the map, if I don't put as of, you know, road closures as of this time, then if that map gets separated from my post and it gets shared 2 days later or 4 days later, that's not, that information is not right anymore, right? And so we want to make sure that if that happens, the information is really clearly marked. Some people aren't going to read it anyway, right? But like we want to do our best, again, to keep us respectable, I suppose, in the public's eyes, right? We want them to trust us. And so if they're seeing stuff from us that's just blatantly untrue or out of date, they're going to question. There's a lot of advantages too, like we're really flexible. We can send out shorter messages. We can let individuals opt in, right? I choose to follow my local police department and county EOC on Facebook, so I know I'm going to get those messages. But that limited control, once the message goes out, man, that's tough. And then the last bullet on this slide, I just want to point to one more time. And that's like, again, to that point of how people learn, we've found truly that a combination of images or iconography and then text has been able to prove that we increase comprehension when we combine those things. So when we have both the map or the symbol sets and some text description, we improve people's comprehension versus one or the other, right? So that combo is going to be really important to us. There are other things that we may want to use our GIS for, and so that one of them is briefings or public meetings, doing handouts. This is an example of a newsletter from the Minnesota Department of Health. They have some maps in here. This gets emailed out to people, and then it lives sort of on their website and can be updated as needed, right? So that's kind of the nice thing about a newsletter like this. When it does live on a website and it's not a printed type of brochure, it can get updated if there's, you know, retractions or changes or things like that. So I think fact sheets, so again, to this map, right, this evacuation zone map, this is going to be something that a fact sheet is really going to want to maybe think about including. So if I'm talking about a fact sheet that's going to help prep people for a hurricane type event, that map, along with things like, you know, your go bag, how much water you want to, you know, make sure people keep in their trunks, those types of things. That map's going to be really helpful because then they're going to have that with them. If the mayor says, or the governor says, like, evacuation zone A, you're out of here, right? Like, you can look at that, you can say, that's me, I'm out, right? And go. And so we want to think about how we can take maps like this, take the types of tools or resources people are used to getting, fact sheets, newsletters, et cetera, and combine them for use here. All right, so when we're talking about designing these graphics, the other thing I haven't talked a lot about is audio explanations. And so one thing that is nice is if we're talking about social media, we can often do voice memos and have or closed caption reading on our social media things. And so there's been a lot of rise of like tools via AI that help do the reading of the thing for you. But I think we all know, like, that one person that always sends us the voice memos instead of a text, right? Like, we can use those in conjunction to describe our map. And so with screen readers and things like that being prevalent, we want to be able, we might not have time, right, to sit down and like go through the background of our website where we're posting our message and like update all of the like alt text and things like that. So adding that voice memo or audio memo to our graphic, combining that, right, with our images, combining that with some text, that's like the triple whammy, right? Like, that's everything that we would need to craft a message that in theory, most people, like language notwithstanding, right, like can understand. And so I like to remind folks to keep that in mind, you know, when they're thinking about their social media messaging, because let's face it, you know, it's not the only way, but like most things are getting disseminated by social media these days. The other thing I will recommend is consider templates. So, you know, to go back to sort of my own experience, I created a map of my county that I used every time it flooded. 90% of the time, I knew exactly what roads were going to flood, and I could, you know, stick those icons on and be like, road closed, and I could go, right? And it was fast. Sometimes that changed. Sometimes it wasn't always, you know, the same roads or improvements got made or things like that. But having that template meant I could deploy it faster to folks. I could send it out via Facebook a lot faster. And then the last thing I'll say here, just to the design point, is we want to keep it simple. KISS, keep it simple. But, you know, sometimes we GIS people will make overly complicated maps because it's fun. that's not going to serve our public, right? Your GIS staff really should be able to engage with you, the PIOs, to be exposed to some of this public messaging training so that they can then, craft maps that are going to fit your need. And so I like to have sort of it go top down, bottom up, right? Like the PIO takes some time to educate the GIS staff. The GIS staff takes some time to educate the PIO on what's the art of what's possible. And then the two of you guys can work better together as things happen and as things, are developing sometimes rapidly during an event. So keep it simple, but keep it combo, right? Like, I don't know what better way to say that, like text, audio, graphic, right? The combo of the three is going to really sell you to the public. All right. So let's think of a sample scenario here. So we have a hazardous materials accident has just occurred. It's shutting a major roadway. We're ordering evacuations for homes within, 1 mile radius of whatever it is, and then we're opening a shelter or something like that. So how might we want to craft a map that is going to, solve sort of this response scenario? Well, we're going to make sure that we want to have the location of our accident. We're going to want to make sure that we have a clear boundary around the homes that are being evacuated or, maybe sheltered in place, depending on the scenario. And we want to make sure that we are looking at the location of the shelter that's being, being chosen as the one that is allowing pets and that people can go to. So let's think about, what that map might look like. And I just realized as I was reading that out loud that my next map is actually for a different scenario. And so it's not going to have all of those things I just talked about on it, but that's okay because we'll talk it out. So this map is actually a practice map from the East Palestine train derailment. So if anyone remembers, February 2023, that train in Ohio was right on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania. It derailed. There was like I think seven different cars that were carrying hazardous material. And so there was a lot of worry, right, about what that meant for the community. And so in this case, the order that they gave was a shelter in place order. And so we have on this map, we have the train derailment location here. We have the shelter in place order in a sort of green polygon here. And then we can see in the title that there's some information about, this train derailment. We're giving a shelter in place order. The data as of February 4th, 2023 at 01:30. And so we can, have all of that in one place. So it's very unlikely that this information is going to get removed from this map because most people are probably just going to snip the whole image or take the whole image with them as they sort of forward it on or send it to their loved ones. And so this is a sort of a good example of ways in which we want to include all of the pertinent information. We have roads are labeled, we have the shelter location, we have the date, time, and the stamp. So, moving backwards, so apologies for the mix up on the graphics there. Going backwards, if this was this hazardous materials sample, right, this might still be pretty close. We might change, instead of saying shelter in place order, we would say evacuate order, and then maybe we would have another pin either to the north or to the west that's saying here's your shelter location, go there, and a note, right, that pets are safe or pets are allowed. And we didn't talk much about that, but you guys know, right, like people don't like to leave their animals. So making sure when you're crafting your messaging, if you have 6 shelters and only 2 of them allow pets, right? Like you might put a little paw print or something on the 2 shelters that indicates to people like pets are allowed here versus not here. And so again, that's thinking about iconography in our messaging versus, skipping that and not thinking about iconography. And so we'll talk, about interactive maps, because these are really like the creme de la creme. So if we're talking about our combo of text, audio, and graphic, right? An interactive map is something that, makes that graphic elevated in some respects. And so I think I've mentioned these things before, but the limitations or the downsides to just a static map is that once it's shared, it's out there on the internet forever. There's sometimes a delay in social media post sharing. You see things go viral 2 days, 48 hours, 36, 72 hours later, whatever it is. And so it's out of date already. And then there are some benefits though. Some news agencies don't want embeddable links or things like that. They just want an image. So we have to kind of weigh the pros and cons here, but there are a lot of pros, right? The interactive maps are easily updatable even after sharing. The URL does not change, but the content can. So, to that point about road closures, if I'm starting here and I have 10 roads or intersections closed in my county, 30 minutes post-event, but now I'm 12 hours post-event and only 5 roads are closed, I can still update that, but people sharing the link are going to see that update. Like, they're not going to see that there are 10, they're going to only see the 5 that are current, right? So we're getting those live status updates. And so this is an example of an interactive map that is really nice. This is from NAPSG. This is they did a presentation, prep tech talk on PIO innovation and tools and best practices. And so one of the things that they showed and highlighted, and the link or the name of the talk is in the source. So when the slides go out later, you can find it. But one of the things they talk about is interactive maps for the public. And so I mentioned way earlier crowdsourcing. And so these types of interactive maps allow people to search for data, search for their homes and see where they sit, right, in comparison to the event. But it also allows them to then respond back to the agency. And so they can, either come in and type in their address and see what's going on, or they can type in their address and say, I have some damage, or I need, there's a tree blocking my driveway, or, whatever it is. And so they can do that crowdsourcing. And then the nice thing about that is once the public goes in and puts their PIN and their address, that is instantly transmitted right back to the EOC. And so it's that near real time, data sharing thing that we can do so that we can understand what's really going on in our community. And we can ask for photos. We can ask for, phone numbers to make sure that we can validate the information later, whatever it is, whatever you're allowed to sort of gather from the public can be included in this. So I would check this out. It's pretty neat talk that they did a couple years ago from NAPSG. And then with that, I got about 10 minutes left, and I saw some stuff in the chat, but I thought, if we wanted to do questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. My email is on here. You can always email me if you think of something later. I'm happy to talk. So let me go check the chat.
Thank you so much, Carmella. So if anybody does want to ask a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question in person, or I am monitoring the chat if you would prefer to enter it in that way. And as Carmella mentioned, I will make sure that you get a copy of the slides afterwards. I will put this recording up on YouTube hopefully early next week, and I'll do a follow-up email and send that out. So does anybody have any questions for Carmella? I have a couple written down, but I'm going to give somebody else the opportunity if they want to go first. I was hoping our main GIS person for KYEM is attending earthquake conference in South Carolina. So he's listening, he's monitoring, but he's also doing some other things. So unfortunately, he can't ask any questions.
Well, maybe
so I will start. I've got two questions to start off with.
Mhm.
So one is about, I tend to get, it seems like when I get people sending me maps and sharing maps, they send multiple maps, and I tend to get a little overwhelmed.
Mhm.
They'll send 4 or 5, and it's hard to, kind of focus on everything at once. So any guidance on how, we as PIOs should approach that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I touched on it a little bit, right, with overly complicated maps. But I think one of the struggles that we often get into is we have a lot of data. And so people think, hey, let's give them everything, right? Like they're going to want to know where every single thing is. And that's not going to work in these types of situations, right? So we want to distill that down to just the most important part. And so I would code that as, right, like the incident location, the protective action response area, so like where the protective action is referring to, and then if they need to leave, where they need to go. So those are the three things, right, that I would say keep it simple and stick with those. From there, if you're finding that that's not enough, I would think really clearly about, is another map needed, or can I transmit this information via text or audio, right? Like, do I need to muddy the waters, so to speak, with another graphic, or can I provide the additional context with just some parentheticals, for example? Does that help?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I will ask again. Does anybody want to ask a question? Because if not, I'm going to follow up. You brought something else out of me. So, you kind of mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier about, getting familiar with the audience and the audience getting familiar with you. And I kind of just sort of thought of something is, I almost never send out any maps in communications unless it's in emergency response. Should we as PIOs try to, I don't want to say manufacture, but find ways to use maps more often in regular communication so that they're more used to it when we really send out the important maps?
Yes. Yeah. No, I would say yes. And I would say that for a couple of reasons, right? The first is that if you're new to an area and the first time you're really getting a sense of like your town or your county is during an emergency, you're not going to really be able to digest that information well, right? And so I love when my local municipality sends out like even maps of like where the Christmas decorations are, or like maps of like the trick-or-treating or the garbage pickup, because that gives me like a sense of how my municipality is breaking down my area, right? And like I can see, oh, they kind of always consider like this subdivision as one chunk, or one zone. And so that gives me more context. So I don't want to say manufacture, but think about sort of organic ways you can add maps, even if it's something like you're having a open house at your EOC and you put a map showing where the EOC is located, right? Like on that. That would be a simple way to bring that
Excellent. Yeah, I didn't really want to use the word manufacturer, but
in.
you know what I was getting at.
Yeah,
A way to kind of drive that. So excellent, excellent. All righty. Last question from me. Is there, more free resources that, the folks that are attending should kind of check out? Or is there a place where you recommend getting more information, taking another step, something we should do? Or just
Yeah, so I'll leave you with maybe two potential action items. The first is truly check out that NAPSIG Prep Tech Talk on PIO innovation. Again, it's about 2 years old now, but It was really, really good. And it really talks about they phrase it as creating a GIS game plan. And so it goes to some of what I talked about the templating and that type of thing. And the other thing I would say, if you haven't done this yet, is introduce yourself to the GIS staff, right? Sometimes some EOCs have a GIS person on staff, sometimes they don't, and they're bringing in, someone from law enforcement or fire that knows GIS, but introduce yourself to that person and get to know them face to face and name to name, because during an event, if you do need something, you know who to go to, they know who you are and why you're asking for it, right? And it's not just another there's a guy asking for stuff and I don't know, what they want type of thing. And so I would say those are my two action items for you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. If you would give me the screen back, I will share again. Everybody give me a round of applause for Carmella. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope everybody did as well. I will, as I said, I will get a copy of the recording up on our YouTube page. Hopefully early next week, I will send everybody out an email with a copy of the presentation. And I want to share my screen, let everybody know what we have coming up in the next couple of months. So as always, you have my contact information. Feel free, call, email, text me anytime you want. I will try to help you. There's the address for where the videos will be, but I'll get you a link to that. I have 2 webinars currently scheduled, and registration is open for those. In June, we have Carol Freeman, who is going to talk about public alert and warning communications. So if you are interested in reducing the process or reducing delays in issuing alert and warning messages, or maximizing your message delivery to the public, then please register for that and join us. And then in July, we are going to have Jeff Donaldson, who is going to speak about lesson learned and best practices from crisis communications in the UNLV shooting that happened on the campus in December of 2023. So if you are interested in that, that should be an interesting talk. He wrote a white paper on that, did a lot of study about how the communications happened from that scene, and then moved out. So please go ahead and register for that. I will send out emails on both of these. Otherwise, again, I want to thank Carmella. Appreciate it so much. It was a great talk, and everybody can have a great afternoon, and we will see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you all.